I wrote this book, Books That Change Minds, in 30 days with the assistance of AI. And it taught me two things. One is that you can't write a book in 30 days. And the second is that AI can't write books. Welcome to the second episode of the 12 books of 2026, where I have set myself the impossible, hopefully possible, task of writing and publishing 12 books this year, and I'm vlogging the process so that you can join me. Whether you're watching to see whether I succeed, whether I fail, whether you're interested in the writing tips, or whether you just think it kind of sounds cool and like the sound of my voice, welcome. And let's dive straight into it. So I'm not going to be going over the content for this book. I will a little bit, but mostly I'm going to be talking about what I learned in the writing process of this book. So Books That Change Minds is, and I like to say that every book has two things that it's about. It has the thing that it's about that you tell everybody, and then it has the thing that it's really about, which is your reader's journey. So Books That Change Minds is about the story psychology of why some nonfiction books impact us on an identity level, and then 7 steps that any author or any writer at any point in their writing journey can hold up to their work and say, are you doing this? But what this book is really about is dismantling the limiting belief that I can't write, that was set in place by a school and university system that taught you that good writing was structurally perfect writing that made you sound intelligent, instead of a conversation between author and reader that creates meaning for the reader. And if you take anything from the rest of this podcast episode, it is that a book is a conversation. It doesn't need to be structured perfectly to make meaning for somebody else. Conversations aren't. They go in all of these, twisty little pathways here and there, doing this and that and the other thing, and we come out the other side feeling differently. To put it really simply, if you read a book or part of a book or a paragraph that you then go to talk to somebody else about, that book, that piece of writing, changed the way you think. As an author, especially working in the nonfiction sphere, that's all we want. And simplifies it right down. Now, this book didn't just come to me and out onto the page in 30 days. I'm going to talk more about my fantasy series in our next podcast, because that was the other book that I released in April. But that's where my writing journey began. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, in 2020, in COVID, when I started writing fantasy to escape the world. Between 2020 and 2024, I wrote 6 books between 90,000 and 150,000 words. So pretty substantial books, and they were all in fantasy. I released them, didn't market them, have since taken them off the market, and am re-releasing with rewrites. But once again, I'm going to focus more on that in the next episode, but it's relevant to you today because I started getting obsessed about story psychology when I started getting obsessed with symbols. I started looking into symbols because I wanted to make my fantasy worlds richer for my readers. I wanted to weave meaning into the manuscripts that were going to create positive change in the people that were reading my work. I read Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung, and my mind was absolutely on fire with the world of archetypes and how it could apply to story. And then I went to Dreamfest, which is one of the biggest business conferences that you can get to in Australia. I went there because I wanted to learn how to sell my fantasy books, but sitting back and listening to these phenomenal speakers that all had multi-million-dollar companies, I realized that they were all telling their facts as stories, and that changed everything. I ended up signing up for a business mentorship that weekend and started getting into coaching, and I started being exposed to all of these people that wanted to write nonfiction books. And I became obsessed with what makes nonfiction books work. Why do some books like The 5-Second Rule and The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck and How to Win Friends and Influence People spread across the world like wildfire and have 2 consistent reactions? And one of those reactions is, this book changed my life. And the other reaction is, I don't understand why everyone likes it. Now, for anyone that's been following my social media journey, I think I'm up to post 250 at the moment, and everything at the beginning was just story psychology. I became story psychology, story psychology, story psychology. I wrote courses on it. I created content around it. I was on fire with these ideas. I started writing it into chapters of my craft books. I started clarifying the ideas around that, which is what has convinced me down the track that you can't write a book in 30 days. Because the actual writing of this book, yeah, I got it done in 30 days. But keep in mind, I've written hundreds of thousands of words over the last couple of years. But you're looking at like over a year of obsession before then. And before we dive into that even more deeply, one of the biggest lessons that I took from learning this book is that you don't need to be the expert before you start. I mean, think about it. I'm writing a book on why books like How to Win Friends and Influence People have inspired the world. That's like top tier nonfiction. I had to learn how not to compare my work to that, otherwise you'll just be crippled. And here I learned and lived through this lesson that you start off interested, you start off curious, you find something that sets your mind on fire and see how it's been applied to your life and how you can use this to take you through difficulties. And when you get to the other side of that, you can start talking about it. And when you start talking, and when I say talking, I also mean writing, you start clarifying your ideas, you start distilling it. When you start learning how to explain something to someone, you start to get mastery over that topic. You take that clarification of ideas and you condense that into a book. In the writing, you become the expert. Another thing here is that I'm not writing for other experts. Now I kind of have like all of this knowledge about story psychology, but I'm not teaching this to people that also have this amount of knowledge about story psychology. So I don't need to sound intelligent. It doesn't need to be fancy. What it needs to do is create meaning for the person that I was before I learned any of this. And writing for this person that needs it simple so that she can just apply it straight away without the year of learning took that imposter syndrome away. Because I can describe, I can write, I can have a conversation with this person easily. Having a conversation with these people that have all of the knowledge, oh, that makes me feel uncomfortable. But having a conversation with the people that need it, yeah, I can do that. But that wasn't 30 days worth of clarifying. I mean, the great books that we talked about before, they weren't written in 30 days. When you're looking at how to condense your passion, your experience into something that makes sense for the person that needs it, that's not just one conversation. That's getting it down, and then it's looking at your writing, it's squinting at it sideways, it's reading it backwards to make sure that it's the simplest way that hits all of the identity markers, it hits all of the story psychology markers to make meaning for that person. I wrote the book in 30 days. I was obsessed with creating meaning for people within this sphere for a year. Now let's get onto the topic that everybody came here for, how I use AI to write my books and how it has convinced me that AI can't write your books. Now my current work in progress is AI Mastery for Authors. That's a working title, a very lofty title, and will probably change in the future. But I learned a lot about the limits of how you can use AI in writing as I was writing books that changed minds, and I'm very excited to start talking about it. And the writing of this book clarified a few things for me. The first is that as an author working within this space, you have to decide how much of the creative process you want to own. AI isn't going anywhere. And the reality is that if you just want to churn out books that hit the really like gnarly identity markers that people just want to consume, you can get out a book a week. Now, for me personally, I like writing. I love writing. I love putting pen down to page. I love clarifying the ideas. I love obsessing about something that I then create. So my fingers are always going to be on the keys. That said, throughout my entire writing journey, I've sought advice from other people. And the way that I use AI now is in the seeking of advice. For example, books that change minds. I had a whole mess of ideas about what I wanted this book to be. I then took this mess, wrote it all down, spaghetti onto the page, and then put that into the AI. I'm using Claude at the moment, and said, I want to write a book around this topic. Help me clarify the idea, the one sentence that this book is around. So it took all of this overwhelm and as phenomenal for structure and took my words and put it in that one sentence. From that one sentence, I could then go and say, okay, this is what this book is going to be about. Here are 12 different things that I would want to include in this. And those were the loose chapter headings that I started to work with and I started to fill out. I started putting where I learned each of these different pieces of information, how I learn them, how it applies to my life, how it can apply to other people's lives. So then that's putting me within this mess. And that's right, it's making another complete and total mess. Now, there are certain structures that all famous books follow. And you can go to your AI and say, hey, I want to write a book like list your 5 titles that are most comparable. Dissect the beat structure and explain it to me. And that will tell you what goes in which places in your books. Once you have a little bit of a grasp around that, what you can do is take this mess of what you kind of want to include in your book and say, acting as a world-class developmental editor with a specialization in New York Times best-selling fiction, take my current working manuscript and give me a structure that is the same as the books that you've listed. Now, if you want to learn how to put prompts together like that, I've got a free series on YouTube called AI Mastery for Writers. I'll pop a link in somewhere. And I'll probably put a paid cap on that sometime in the future, so go and have a look. For anyone that's not a writer, that is still here, and you want to learn how to build those prompts, videos 1 to 4 and then 7 will be most applicable for you. And then the intervening ones in the middle of there are the ones that really dissect the prompts for writers. But what we've done here is you take my words and then put it into a structure. Now, the structure that it comes out with this, I didn't include it in the prompt that I just said because it's a bit wordy, but it is in that video series that I just mentioned, is that I don't let AI do the writing for me. I ask it to provide a structure that I can fill back in with myself. So it's got all of the things that I want to include with that, and then takes the book structure that has been proven to work, that a developmental editor would be comparing your works with against anyway, and structures your information so you can then go in with this nice clean structure and fill your chapters out with you once again. So the way that I use AI is it's this backwards and forwardsing process where I do the creative part and it does the structure part. Something that's really important to note with the use of AI is that it sounds like it's speaking English, but it's speaking with English words within the frame of what it's been trained on. We are speaking English words within the frame of what we have been trained on, which is our reality. Now, there is an overlap here, which is where we try to communicate with Claude or ChatGPT or whatever AI you have, and it tries to communicate back. But our frames of reference are different. You've probably heard about delusion spiraling. I'll get into it in another video because it is really relevant for the AI Mastery book that I'm writing. But essentially, when you ask for a report, it can compare things really well and it gives you a solid structure if you give it the right prompt. But when you start getting into backwards and forwards in conversational territory, that's where you start getting bad answers. That's where you start getting delusion spiraling. That's where you start getting it just feeding back positive things to you that are going to keep you on the website. And that's where you start to lose trust with it. But what it is very, 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 very good at is let me get untongue-tied here. Let's see if I can untwist that. Blah. What it is very, very good at is if you come and give it a body of work and say, compare it to these body of works. This is my writing. This is the writing that hits that New York Times bestseller list, and saying, I want you to compare this. It will tell you how they are similar and it will tell you how they are different. And now this is what your developmental editor would be doing. With the right prompt, it takes my AI a couple of minutes. With a developmental editor, it takes them a month at least for a decent sized manuscript, and is a couple of $1,000s for a good one. So this is how I, as an indie author, save money. Now, your developmental edit is one of the edits that your book goes through. I have different prompts for every sort of stage and different programs that I use for every stage of the editorial process. There's a list for that on my website. Go check it out. And then I use a human assessment for the manuscript assessment at the very end, which tells me if it's ready for the market or not. So you do still need human eyes on it. Ultimately, you're writing for other humans to read. So at some point in the editorial process, you do need a human there. But this is how I save thousands of dollars and months on time, and how I'm going to be able to get all of these books out this year. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. Knock on wood. What else can I do? But I still haven't answered that question, how I became convinced that AI cannot write for me. And it's not just because I like writing and want to be doing it myself. It's because when I was writing this book, as I started going through that clarifying process, I put in everything that I'd written about story psychology, and I'm good at writing in my tone. It's conversational. When you read what I write, it sounds like I'm having that conversation with you. Like, there are errors, there are idiosyncrasies. I go wandering off in different directions, and sometimes I open loops that I forget to close. On that note, if I bring up a question in one of these podcasts that I forget to answer because I don't have a script here, I'm just talking at you, pop it in a comment and I'll make sure to answer it in the next video. Or if you have any questions in general, pop it in a comment and I am happy to answer it in the next video, because then that turns it into a fun conversation between us. Now what was the question I just asked? Right, the loop that I opened at the very beginning. I gave AI all of this writing that I had done. It had all of my obsession. It had all of my tone. And as I was going through the process of writing this book, every now and again, I would say, I wonder if it could write this chapter for me. I would give it a very good prompt. I would give it the source material that it needed for my tone and see what came out. And it was never me. It had some good points. It was never me. And I was trying really hard to make it work. At this stage in the proceeding, AI can't have a conversation. And if you remember what I said at the very beginning of this podcast, is a book is a conversation between author and reader. This might change in the future, but for now, if you want to write a book that impacts other humans on an identity level, you need to be able to prove through your writing that it is a human having this conversation. And at this stage, AI can't do that. And it's not just about the EM dashes. It's not just about the quiet knowing. It's not just about the perfectly structured sentences and the triplicates that it is so fond of. The good news here is that if you have got an AI to write for you, that's a really good structure to start with. You can look at that. You can go through its paragraphs. You can go through its chapters and say, what of this have I actually done? What have I actually experienced? How have I actually applied this? You can look at the point that it makes and say, yes, I agree with that. How would I explain that to somebody else? So if you have a book that you've written by AI and now you're looking at it and you're kind of overwhelmed because there's so much good content there, but you're not really across it because you didn't write it, and there's a lot of you in it, but it's not quite you, don't worry. It is salvageable. You just have to go in, read through every part of it, and pop yourself back in. I do have an important note about the sort of reports that AI can give you though, and is that 70% of it is perfect and about 30% of it is utter garbage. It's doing its comparison work, it's doing its best according to the prompt that you've given it, but it is not a human. And the easiest way that I have found to sort of discern whether what it's given me is something that's amazing that I just can't quite understand yet, or whether that is, in fact, a little piece of garbage that doesn't withstand human application, is trusting the gut. But what does that mean? Not everybody has a really great sense of intuition. A really easy way to realize that is that if you're reading something, if you're reading a report that it's given you and your brain slides off the page, you realize that you've read this paragraph 3 times and it hasn't gone in, there's something within that your brain fundamentally doesn't agree with. It doesn't want to let it in. You can just delete that, or you can dissect it and say, why don't I like it? It's up to you. I prefer to go for the delete option because it helps me stay away from delusion spiraling. Another thing to note with these reports, which is the last reason why you can't write this kind of book in a month, is that the process that I talked to you before about taking your overwhelm, clarifying it into an idea, then creating more mess, and then creating more structure, then creating more mess, and then creating more structure, is a process that would typically take a human brain a year to go through, minimum. Clarifying that quickly, taking all of these big ideas and simplifying it that quickly, and then expanding it out and getting these reports that are dissecting what you're doing, these big reports dissecting what you're doing, is a huge amount of information. Conscious brain can only handle so much information at any one time. Whenever I get a really big, a really meaty, really detailed report about any piece of writing that I've done, I read the report and then I get up and walk away. It's too much for your conscious brain to start processing that and start pulling that apart and start applying that right now. Because I'm not AI. I'm not a computer. Despite whether someone here might be thinking that this is an AI-generated podcast, it's not. Look at the mistakes. Look at how many times I click when I'm speaking, no matter how many times I try to stop. Now, your subconscious can handle insane amounts of information. Conscious brain, not so much. You need to be able to step away from your idea. You need to be able to let the report sink in. You need to be able to give your creativity space to play around with what it's just learned and figure out how to slot that in with the expertise and your passion and this thing that you want to be writing about. Sometimes I go an entire week between getting the report and being able to start integrating that into the writing. When I'm not on the kind of deadline that I've set myself for this year with the 12 books, sometimes it takes a month of just letting it rest and then coming back to it. And that's not failure. That's not procrastination. That's working with the creative process, and that's working with the way that your brain likes to work, which is by chuffing away silently in the background about whatever you're obsessing about, and then making these connections when you're out for a run, or when you're dancing, or when you're gone for a walk, or in the middle of the night, where you just sit up and go, oh, I've got it. That can't be done in a month. The 12 books that I have lined up for this year are all already in different stages of writing. 3 of them are already 90% written because I republished them because I published them previously and am now republishing them with story psychology layered over the top to make the manuscripts just like perfect for me. Now, what are some other things I learned in the publishing of this book? Oh yeah, it's that every stage of the way there is something that's going to go wrong. And indie authorship is kind of like entrepreneurship. Your happiness in life is determined about how quickly you can pivot, how quickly you can get a problem and say, okay, that didn't work. Let's try plan B. What's plan B? I need to make plan B. All right, let's go make plan B. One of which is that this is the first author copy that I got for this book, and it has an entire chapter in bold print. It's perfect. I also found that later on in this book, the dot points that I had, you would have 1, 2, 3, and then a couple of chapters later, you would have what I needed to be a 1, 2, 3, but it was actually a 4, 5, 6, and it made its way all the way up to 12 in the end of the book. And this is one of the things I love about indie publishing, is that within these mistakes, I can then just go back into my formatting software. I like to use Atticus and change it and then re-upload it, and it was fixed in a day. Another thing that I learned is that, Amazon, good old Amazon. So the 2 books that I published in March, Books That Change Minds, the nonfiction book, and Under the Blood Moon, which is a fantasy romance book, they both have between 16 and 25 reviews on Amazon, which is a great thing. These reviews are on Amazon US. So if you look up On Amazon AUS, it looks like it hasn't even been read once. Whereas if you Google the books, they come up with all of these reviews. And that's because Amazon is a closed system for each country. There are some authors and some stores that have global ratings, but there isn't actually a process that you can go through to get the global ratings. Some people are just blessed by the Amazon gods. I am not one of these people. And I can almost hear someone in the background going, maybe if you hadn't tried to put the book out so quickly, you wouldn't have made these mistakes. Maybe, but maybe I would have anyway. And I'm still proud of it because now I've written and published the book on story psychology. And the process confirmed for me, you can't write a book in 30 days. And it convinced me that I need AI to write my book, and AI cannot write my book. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed the podcast, pop a comment. If you have any questions, pop a comment. Help an indie author out. And also just let me know that I'm not alone here. Books That Change Minds is available for the rest of the month for $1 on Amazon, as I'm working through some different marketing campaigns for that. It's also free if you have Kindle Unlimited. AI Mastery for Writers, the YouTube series, is on my Voice to Paid YouTube channel. Go check it out. Once again, it's free for now, but I'll probably turn it into paid content later. And then once I make enough money, I'll probably make it back free again. But hey, girls got bills. If you want the list of programs that I use, it is on my website, yourvoice2page.com. And I'll see you next week, where I talk about everything that I learned in the publishing, writing, republishing, writing again, and then republishing again of the first book in my fantasy romance series, Under the Blood Moon.